Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most mysterious and thrilling stories of ancient mythology, the tale of the Minotaur and the Labyrinth. You've probably heard of the beast, but have you ever wondered how a monster like this came to be? Spoiler alert, it's not your average hero slays monster story. There's a lot more going on than just a fight to the death. Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, why not tell me in the comments where you're from and what time it is where you are? It's always fun to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's begin with the origins of the Minotaur. Picture yourself standing on the shores of ancient Crete, the warm Mediterranean breeze brushing past, the sound of crashing waves filling the air. Behind you, the grand city of Knossos rises, boasting towering walls and grand palaces. But even in such a mighty city, there's a darkness lurking, waiting to take form. And that darkness would soon come in the shape of a beast, a creature so fearsome that it would strike terror into the hearts of anyone who dared approach it. It all starts with King Minos, a ruler whose power was as great as his ego. You see, Minos wasn't always a king who had it all figured out. There was a time when he was just another mortal, hoping for favor from the gods, and, like any ambitious king, he wanted to prove himself worthy of divine attention. So he made a request of Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, asking for a sign of approval, a token that would prove he was the right man to rule Crete. Poseidon, in his typical fashion, granted the king's wish, but with a twist. Instead of offering Minos the expected favor, Poseidon sent him a magnificent white bull, the kind of creature that could make any king feel like he had won the favor of the gods themselves. But Minos, not content with the bull's beauty, decided he would keep it for himself, offering a substitute in its place to the god as a tribute. This, my friend, was a mistake that would soon give birth to the terrifying tale of the Minotaur. Poseidon, enraged by Minos' arrogance, decided to punish him in the only way he knew how. He cursed Minos' wife, Pasiphae, with an uncontrollable desire to mate with the magnificent bull, and so, through a divine curse, the queen gave birth to a creature unlike any other, a beast with the body of a man and the head of a bull. This monstrosity, known as the Minotaur, was kept hidden away in the Labyrinth, a maze of unimaginable complexity designed by the brilliant inventor Daedalus. But here's the kicker: no one could escape the Labyrinth. Once someone entered, they were destined to wander forever, lost in its twisting corridors. The Minotaur, meanwhile, grew, fed by the sacrifices of the Athenian youth sent each year to feed it. And you might be thinking, but what about the bull? Did it just forget about its original purpose? Well, it turns out the bull had its own story, one that also involved divine retribution. See, the bull wasn't just a gift. It was the beginning of a series of events that would set into motion the tragic fate of Crete and its king. So, there you have it. The birth of the Minotaur isn't just a monster story. It's a tale of arrogance, divine punishment, and a twisted form of justice that only the gods could dish out. The question is, though, how did the people of Crete cope with this terrifying new reality? And what would it take to finally rid the world of this beast? You're probably wondering, okay, so we have a terrifying beast locked away in a maze, but how did we get to the point where Athens had to start sending tribute to feed this monster? Well, let's step back for a minute and look at what's going on in the bigger picture, because things are about to get a lot darker now. Picture the grand palace of King Minos at Knossos again, majestic, imposing, and definitely not the kind of place where you'd expect a disaster to brew. But this is where things started to spiral out of control. Minos' arrogance wasn't just confined to his dealings with the gods. It affected everyone around him. It wasn't long before Minos' relationship with the Athenians took a major nosedive. Here's how it went down. Minos, having solidified his reign and secured his place among the gods, found himself in conflict with Athens. Now, Athens wasn't some small city-state to be brushed aside. In fact, it was rapidly growing in influence and power. But Minos, he was a proud king, and when the Athenians killed his son, Androgeos, during a trip to Athens, Minos wasn't exactly the forgiving type. In fact, he was furious. Imagine someone breaking your favorite vase, only to walk away like nothing happened. That's the level of offense Minos felt. So, instead of confronting the situation head-on like a rational king might, Minos took a rather dramatic approach. He launched a war against Athens, and when the Athenians finally surrendered, he struck a deal with them that would ensure his revenge and, in a way, keep the beast fed. Here's the deal. Every year, Athens would send 7 youths and 7 maidens to Crete as tribute, where they'd be sacrificed to the Minotaur. It was a brutal solution to his wrath, but hey, it solved 2 problems at once, right? He got to punish Athens, and the Minotaur would always have fresh food to devour. But imagine this for a second, being one of those youths or maidens. Can you even begin to fathom the dread of knowing you're about to be sent to a faraway land to face certain death with no hope of escape? Now, that's the kind of horror that would shape generations. You'd be stepping onto the ship, looking out at the Aegean Sea, and knowing that no matter what, you weren't coming back. It's enough to give anyone nightmares. But here's where the story gets interesting. Remember how I mentioned the Labyrinth? The maze that kept the Minotaur trapped, and more importantly, kept the people trapped with it. Well, this wasn't just a physical maze, it was a trap for the soul. There was no way out once you entered, and that's where the terrifying part came in. The youths and maidens sent by Athens, they weren't just being fed to the beast. They were doomed to wander the labyrinth, unable to find their way out, and no one, not even Daedalus, the brilliant inventor who designed it, could truly escape its confusing paths. It was as if the labyrinth itself was a reflection of the curse Minos had brought upon Crete. This, my friend, is where the Greek gods' idea of justice really starts to get a little dark. They didn't just want to punish Minos, they wanted to remind everyone of their power, of how far-reaching their influence could be. Every year, the tribute, the sacrifice, the hopelessness, it was a never-ending reminder that no one, not even a king, could defy the gods without consequences. And for the Athenians, well, it meant sending their children to their deaths to appease Minos, praying that maybe, just maybe, the gods would show some mercy. But what if there was a way out? What if there was someone who could break the cycle? Someone who would face the beast, conquer the labyrinth, and put an end to this cursed tribute? Well, this is where our hero, Theseus, enters the scene. All right, things are starting to heat up. You've been following along with the Athenians' grim fate. But here comes the hero, the one and only Theseus. Now, I know what you're thinking. Here comes the guy who's going to save the day. But before you get too excited, let's just say that Theseus' journey is far from a straightforward hero defeats villain kind of deal. The gods, as always, have a few tricks up their sleeves, so imagine this. You're Theseus, a young, ambitious prince from Athens, and you hear about the yearly tribute to Crete. You've probably heard the stories of the terrifying Minotaur, and you've definitely heard the whispers about the labyrinth, this maze so complex that even Daedalus, the architect, couldn't find his way out. Now, the Athenians, understandably, are not happy about this annual sacrifice, and Theseus, being the bold and determined type, decides he's going to do something about it. But here's the twist. Theseus isn't just walking into this situation blindly. No, he knows he has to figure out how to navigate this beast of a maze. He knows he'll need help, and that's where Ariadne comes in. Ariadne is the daughter of King Minos. You might picture her as some princess locked away in her palace, but nope, she's got her own agenda. See, Ariadne wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea of her father forcing Athens to send innocent lives to their deaths. She hated the cruelty, and even more, she hated what the Minotaur had come to represent, the embodiment of her family's punishment. It wasn't long before she found herself torn between loyalty to her father and her growing sympathy for Theseus. Now, here's where it gets a bit complicated. Imagine you're Ariadne. You've got the power to help Theseus, but doing so would mean betraying your own family. If your father knew, he'd probably have you locked away, or worse yet. In a moment of compassion, or maybe just plain rebellion, Ariadne gives Theseus the one thing he needs to survive the labyrinth, a bowl of thread. She tells him to tie one end to the entrance of the maze, and as he ventures deeper into the dark corridors, he should unwind it so he can follow it back out. Simple, right? But that's the thing about myths. Nothing's ever as simple as it seems. The thread, while a literal lifeline, represents something more profound, a connection, Ariadne's own inner turmoil and defiance. She's giving him the means to escape, but at the same time, she's offering him the power to break the cycle of sacrifice, to challenge the system that's been in place for years. What Ariadne doesn't know, though, is that she's about to play a role in a much bigger story, one that might even change her life forever. But more on that later. So, Theseus is now armed with a simple piece of string and the hopes of an entire city resting on his shoulders. As he steps into the labyrinth, the first thing you notice is the overwhelming darkness. It's not just physical darkness either. It's the kind of claustrophobic, suffocating feeling that grips your chest and makes you second-guess every step. Each corner seems to lead to another dead end, each passage twisting in ways you couldn't have possibly predicted. And this is where the Minotaur waits. You've probably imagined it by now, half man, half bull, with horns that could pierce through stone. But as Theseus ventures deeper into the maze, he knows that brute strength alone won't be enough. He has to outsmart the beast, and the thread is his only guide. At this point you might be thinking, isn't this just a story about a guy who faces a monster in a maze? Well, not really. The labyrinth itself is just as much a part of the story as the Minotaur. It's the maze of the mind, the traps we set for ourselves, the choices we make, and the consequences that follow. And let's face it, Theseus isn't just fighting a monster. He's fighting his own fears, the weight of his city's expectations, and the curse of the gods. But he keeps going. He follows the thread, ignoring the eerie silence of the maze, and finally, after what feels like an eternity, he comes face to face with the Minotaur. The beast stands tall, roaring in fury, its horns gleaming in the dim light. The moment of confrontation is here, and there's no turning back. All right, now we've arrived at the big moment, the showdown between Theseus and the Minotaur. And believe me, it's not just a fight of strength. It's a clash of wills, a battle that's been building up for years, with the fate of an entire city hanging in the balance. You can almost feel the tension in the air, right? The dark, twisting corridors of the labyrinth suddenly feel smaller as the beast approaches. Now, picture this. You're Theseus. You've been following the thread for what seems like hours, your heart racing with every step, knowing that at any moment you'll be face to face with the Minotaur. The ground beneath you is cold and uneven, and every sound, your breath, the rustling of the thread, even the echo of your own footsteps feels amplified. The labyrinth isn't just a maze, it's alive, it's watching, and it's waiting for you to slip up. You know that once you meet the Minotaur, there's no turning back. But then there it is, the Minotaur, standing tall and terrifying in the gloom, half man, half bull, with eyes that gleam with an almost savage intelligence. It's not just a monster, it's a force of nature, wild, uncontrollable, driven by hunger and rage. And the moment you lock eyes with it, you know this isn't going to be easy. The fight begins. Now, let's be honest here. It's not going to be like one of those Hollywood movies where the hero just lands a quick punch and calls it a day. No, this is a battle of wits, of endurance. Theseus knows he can't just go charging at the Minotaur with his sword. That would be foolish. He has to be strategic. The Minotaur is powerful, but it's also enraged and blinded by its own fury. The key is in how Theseus can use the maze to his advantage. As the beast charges, Theseus darts to the side. Narrowly avoiding the deadly horns, he moves quickly, relying on the thread that Ariadne gave him to guide his path. It's his only way out, his one shot at survival. And as the Minotaur lunges again, Theseus seizes the moment. With a swift, well-aimed strike, he drives his sword into the creature's heart. The Minotaur lets out a deafening roar, a sound that echoes through the labyrinth, and then, just like that, it falls to the ground. For a moment, everything is still. The labyrinth falls quiet, the beast is dead. But the victory feels bittersweet. Yes, Theseus has defeated the Minotaur, but at what cost? How many lives had been lost before his? How many children had been sacrificed to appease the gods, to feed the hunger of the monster that was now lying at his feet? The victory doesn't feel like a triumph. It feels like an end to something much darker. But before Theseus can even process his victory, there's another challenge ahead. He still has to find his way out of this cursed maze. The thread, now his only guide, still winds through the labyrinth. But will it be enough to lead him to safety, or is he still trapped in the gods' twisted game? As Theseus stands over the fallen Minotaur, the realization sets in. The monster might be dead, but the labyrinth is far from conquered. He's made it this far, but there's still the journey out. The question now is, can he escape the maze that's designed to keep everyone in? Or will the gods find another way to punish him for his hubris? And speaking of gods, here's where things take another turn. You see, while Theseus is celebrating his victory, he's unaware that the gods aren't exactly thrilled with how things have gone down. You'd think they'd be happy to see the monster gone. But no, the gods, with their complex motives and eternal grudges, are never far behind, always watching, always waiting for a chance to strike. As Theseus finally turns to leave the labyrinth, he might think he's in the clear, but little does he know this victory has only set him on a new path, one that will lead to even more challenges ahead. And for Ariadne, the woman who helped him, well, her role in the story is far from over either. The thread may have guided Theseus through the maze, but Ariadne's own fate is tied to this story in ways she hasn't yet realized. So Theseus has killed the Minotaur, and after what must have felt like an eternity of twists and turns, he's made it out of the labyrinth. The thread Ariadne's lifeline guides him safely back to the entrance, where he takes a deep breath, realizing he survived the impossible. The beast that had haunted Athens for so long is no more. The terror of the Minotaur's reign is finally over, and with that, Theseus becomes a hero in the eyes of Athens. But here's the kicker. Just because you've defeated a monster doesn't mean the gods are done with you. Oh no. Theseus still has a long road ahead, and this is where things start to get a little complicated, you see, as he makes his way back to the ship that will carry him home to Athens. Theseus is so wrapped up in the triumph of his victory that he forgets something crucial. Remember that promise he made to his father, King Aegeus, the one where he promised to change his sails from black to white if he came back victorious. Yeah, well, Theseus, in all his excitement, forgets to do that little thing. So the ship sails back to Athens, and King Aegeus, standing on the cliffs, watches eagerly, waiting for the white sails that signal his son's return. But as the ship grows closer, he sees the dreaded black sails instead. In a panic, Aegeus believes that his son has died, and in his grief, he throws himself into the sea, ending his own life. This is, of course, the tragic irony of it all. Theseus' victory, which was supposed to bring joy and relief, ends up causing his father's death. Now, let's take a moment to think about this. Theseus didn't mean for any of this to happen. He was caught up in the whirlwind of his heroism, in the excitement of having killed the Minotaur. But in his rush to get back to Athens, he made a simple human mistake, and that mistake cost his father his life. It's a harsh reminder that no matter how brave or heroic you are, sometimes the consequences of your actions are beyond your control. This tragedy, while unavoidable, is the kind of twist that gods love to throw into these kinds of stories. They just can't help themselves, can they? But let's get back to Ariadne, who's probably been pacing at this point, wondering where the heck Theseus is. She helped him escape, after all. She gave him the thread that saved his life. She expected to be swept away, to share in the glory of his triumph. But Theseus, being the classic hero that he is, kind of forgets about her. Ariadne, heartbroken and abandoned on the island of Naxos, is left in the dust. And while she's sitting there, probably thinking she's been the victim of some tragic love story, she meets a god. Enter Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and, let's be honest, a bit of chaos. Dionysus takes one look at Ariadne, sees the potential in her, and decides she's going to be his wife. Yep, just like that. Talk about a plot twist. Ariadne, abandoned by Theseus, is now about to marry a god. So the gods may not always treat you kindly, but they sure know how to offer some unexpected second chances. And while Ariadne's story takes a strange but happier turn, Theseus, meanwhile, is left to rule Athens, a city that now sees him as a hero, but is still reeling from the loss of King Aegeus. The gods have a way of making sure that the consequences of our actions linger, don't they? No matter how heroic we are, the gods' wrath is always lurking in the background, ready to stir up a little chaos. So Theseus' story is one of both triumph and tragedy. He slays the Minotaur, saves Athens, and wins the admiration of the people. But in the process, he loses his father, his moral compass, and ultimately his own sense of what it means to be a hero. It's not all glory and gold sometimes. The price of heroism is saint. All right, so Theseus has done the unthinkable. He killed the Minotaur, escaped the Labyrinth, and returned to Athens, but at what cost? His father, King Aegeus, is dead, and the consequences of his actions will haunt him for the rest of his life. He may be celebrated as a hero, but the tragic twist of his father's death, caused by his own forgetfulness, cast a long shadow over his accomplishments. And yet, life goes on. Theseus still holds the throne of Athens, but it's clear that even the greatest of heroes had their own demons to face. Now, let's take a breather and focus on Theseus' rule for a moment. He's the king now. This means a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility, and a lot of decisions that could either elevate Athens or bring it to ruin. But Theseus, fresh from his heroic feats, is eager to lead his people to glory. In his mind, Athens is now safe. He's conquered the monster, outsmarted the gods, and escaped death itself. What could possibly go wrong? But life, as always, has a way of challenging even the most well-intentioned kings. Theseus, for all his wisdom and strength, faces one of the toughest decisions of his reign. And this is where we see the complex side of his character. After the death of his father, Theseus decides that he will marry, and in doing so, he needs to find the right queen to stand by his side. He can't rule alone forever, right? And that's when the drama really starts. In a classic hero meets villain fashion, Theseus' first marriage is to a woman named Phaedra. Now, Phaedra isn't just any ordinary princess. She's the daughter of King Minos, yes, the very same King Minos who was responsible for the Minotaur in the first place. But as you can probably guess, marrying into a family that's already been intertwined with tragedy isn't the best idea. Theseus, for all his intelligence, seems to have inherited some of that arrogance that first led him to forget about the black sails. Marrying Phaedra may have seemed like a logical choice, but it opens up a whole new chapter of misfortune for him. Phaedra, unfortunately, falls in love with her stepson, Hippolytus. And if you're familiar with Greek mythology, you already know this is not going to end well. The gods, as always, have a hand in these stories, and they're always ready to make things just a little bit worse. Phaedra's love for Hippolytus is cursed, and she's driven mad by her passion. In a fit of despair, she accuses Hippolytus of assaulting her, a lie that leads to disastrous consequences. Theseus, in his anger and grief, curses his son, Hippolytus, which ultimately leads to the young man's tragic death. What you're seeing here is a pattern. Theseus, despite his great victories, is constantly surrounded by tragedy, some of it self-inflicted. His life is a series of heroic feats, yes, but also a constant struggle with the consequences of his decisions. It's a reminder that even the most celebrated heroes can be trapped by their own flaws. And let's not forget Phaedra, who, after everything unfolds, is consumed by guilt and ends her own life. In the end, Theseus is left alone, haunted by the tragic chain of events set into motion by his own actions. Once again, the gods step in, taking control of his fate, pushing him into a cycle of suffering and loss. For all the glory he's earned, he can't escape the tragic lessons that come with the power he holds. Now, let's pause and think about the bigger picture here. Theseus is often seen as a hero, someone who conquered monsters, saved cities, and faced down impossible odds. But beneath all that, there's a darker side to his legacy. The gods, in their own way, show us that even the mightiest of heroes are subject to fate. They can't control everything, no matter how much they think they can. Every victory, every triumph comes with a price. It's a harsh lesson, but one that's common in Greek mythology. Heroes are not perfect. They make mistakes, they face consequences, and they often find themselves trapped in cycles of suffering. Theseus' story, much like those of many heroes before and after him, reminds us that even the greatest among us are bound to be shaped and sometimes broken by the very forces they seek to overcome. You're probably thinking, okay, so Theseus has had a rough ride. He's faced monsters, lost loved ones, made huge mistakes. But surely there's some redemption in sight, right? Well, Hold on to your seat, because while Theseus' life certainly doesn't lack drama, there's still more to come. You see, Greek heroes don't get the luxury of peaceful endings. No, Theseus' legacy is a tangled web of glory, tragedy, and unfinished business that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. After the devastating loss of his son Hippolytus, Theseus doesn't exactly get the peace he might have hoped for. Instead, he finds himself in exile. Yep, that's right, after ruling over Athens. With all the bravado of a hero, Theseus is eventually driven out of the city he fought to save. How does this happen? Well, after all the chaos and grief, the people of Athens, who once saw him as their greatest champion, began to turn on him. It's the classic too much tragedy scenario. The people, tired of the constant misfortune tied to his rule, see his presence as a curse, and they cast him aside. Not the way anyone expects a hero's tale to end, right? So Theseus, the once great king, ends up wandering, searching for a place where he can find peace. You can imagine that he's lost, not just physically, but emotionally too. His victories seem hollow, and the memory of his father's death, his son's tragic fate, and the consequences of his actions weigh heavily on him. He's not just a man without a kingdom. He's a man searching for meaning in a life that has been filled with too many losses. Now, this part of Theseus' story is a bit strange. You might expect a hero to find redemption after all the suffering he's endured, right? Maybe he'll get a second chance to right his wrongs, maybe even a place to settle and be remembered as a true hero. But that's not how it goes. Theseus finds himself on the island of Cyrus, where he is taken in by Lycomedes, the king. At first, this seems like it could be a fresh start, a place where Theseus can finally put his past behind him. But here's where things take another turn for the worse and a cruel twist. Lycomedes, fearing that Theseus' reputation and strength could threaten his own rule, decides that the only way to deal with the exile king is to, well, push him off a cliff. Yes, you heard that right. Theseus, the hero who once defeated the Minotaur, ends up being betrayed and thrown to his death by the very people he trusted. The gods, ever present in the lives of mortals, have a final, bitter laugh at his expense. And there you have it, Theseus' tragic end. His story, filled with glory and loss, ends with him alone, betrayed and cast aside. It's one of the most poetic downfalls in Greek mythology. The very qualities that made him a hero, his ambition, his courage, his willingness to face the impossible, also led to his undoing. He wasn't immune to the whims of the gods, and his arrogance in thinking he could outsmart fate sealed his tragic fate. But here's the thing. Even though Theseus ends up in exile, even though his life is marked by betrayal and loss, he's still remembered. His name lives on in the myths, in the stories that generations continue to tell. In the end, his legacy isn't just about the battles he won or the monsters he slayed. It's about the lessons learned from his mistakes. It's about the price of heroism and how no one, not even a king, can escape the consequences of their actions. Now, let's zoom out for a moment and reflect on what makes Theseus' story so captivating. You've got the Minotaur, the Labyrinth, the betrayals, the losses, and yet, at the heart of it all is a man who is undeniably human. He's not some flawless, untouchable figure. He's a hero, yes, but also deeply flawed. His story is a reminder that greatness comes with sacrifice, that the gods, for all their power, have their own rules, and those rules aren't always kind. You've followed Theseus through his heroic victories, his crushing defeats, and the inevitable tragedy that marked the final chapter of his life. But let us take a step back and think about the legacy he left behind. Because here's the thing about Greek mythology. It is all about the stories we tell, and no matter how many mistakes Theseus made, his story still echoes through the ages, inspiring and warning in equal measure. So what exactly did the people of Athens and the world at large learn from Theseus? One of the most fascinating things about Theseus is that his tale isn't just about slaying monsters. Sure, killing the Minotaur is the big, obvious triumph. But there's so much more to his story than that. Theseus was a symbol of progress, a man who sought to bring order and structure to a world filled with chaos. He didn't just fight to defeat monsters. He fought to bring about change. His decision to unify the city-states of Athens and bring them under one banner was revolutionary. Theseus' vision of a united, powerful Athens became a symbol of leadership, a city-state that could stand tall against the forces of tyranny and disorder. Yet, ironically, the very ideals Theseus championed were the ones that led to his downfall. He believed in his own power and ability to control his fate, but time and again we see him face the consequences of his hubris. The gods never forget. They may smile upon a hero's victories, but they're quick to remind him of his limits. Theseus was a man who thought he could outwit fate. He thought he could defeat the Labyrinth, defeat the gods, and make his own destiny. But in the end, the gods reminded him that no one is ever truly in control. Let's take a moment to consider how Theseus is remembered by later generations. While his tragic end in exile might paint him as a cautionary figure, it doesn't erase the fact that he made an indelible mark on history. Theseus was, in many ways, the archetype of the tragic hero, someone who rises to greatness only to fall because of his own flaws. His ambition, his desire to be more than just a mortal man, is what made him both remarkable and doomed. His story is filled with impossible feats, yes, but also with heart-wrenching losses that show the fragility of even the mightiest. The Greeks were obsessed with the idea of fate and free will, and Theseus was a prime example of both. He believed he could control his own destiny, but the gods, whether through a simple oversight, a cruel twist of fate, or a divine punishment, showed him that no one can escape the will of the gods. Theseus was a hero, but he was also deeply human. His flaws made him relatable, and his journey remains one of the most enduring and tragic of all Greek myths. Now, if you're anything like me, you might wonder how these stories have continued to resonate throughout the ages. How does the tale of a hero who failed, who made mistakes, and who lost everything still feel relevant today? The answer lies in the very nature of Theseus' story. It's a story of ambition, of defiance, of fighting for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's a reminder that the road to greatness is not a straight line. It's filled with twists, turns, and pitfalls, some of which we might never see coming. But the most powerful aspect of Theseus' legacy is the way it reflects the human condition. He was driven by a desire for greatness, for glory, and for the approval of the gods. But in seeking that approval, he lost sight of what truly mattered. His story is about the price of ambition, about the cost of heroism, and about how no matter how hard we try, we can't always control our fate. And that's the beauty of Greek mythology. It's not just about gods and monsters. It's about us. It's about the choices we make, the consequences of those choices, and the ways in which we're all at the mercy of something bigger than ourselves. Whether it's the gods, fate, or our own flaws, we're all bound by forces that are beyond our control. Theseus' story may be a myth, but the lessons it holds are as relevant now as they were thousands of years ago. As we continue to unravel the threads of Theseus' story, one thing becomes clear. No matter how legendary a hero may be, their journey is never simply about the victories they achieve. It's about what happens after the dust settles, when the battles are over and the glory fades. Theseus, like many heroes before him, found that the true test wasn't in defeating the monster or completing the quest. It was in the aftermath, in how one copes with the choices they made, and how those choices ripple through the lives of others. After his exile from Athens, Theseus found himself alone in his final days, far removed from the city he had once ruled. And though his story had been filled with triumphs, it's this period of solitude and reflection that provides the most striking contrast to his earlier days. He had once been the very symbol of strength and leadership. He had tamed the beast, solved the impossible puzzle, and led his city to greatness. Yet here he was, a shadow of his former self, wandering in exile with no kingdom to call his own. The gods, in their seemingly unending pursuit of balance, had ensured that his final chapter would be one of both humility and regret. The beauty of Theseus' myth, however, lies not just in the sweeping events of his life, but in the moments of stillness that follow. It's the quiet that speaks the loudest, isn't it? It's in the exile, the loss, and the regret that we see the humanity in a man who once stood above it all. He wasn't just a hero, he was a man, flawed and vulnerable, like the rest of us. And in that vulnerability, we find the real power of his story. Theseus' ultimate fate, abandoned by those who once hailed him as a hero, is a poignant reminder that the pursuit of greatness often comes with a price. And when the gods are done testing you, when you've paid the toll for your choices, all that's left is the quiet echo of a once grand life. Theseus didn't just lose his kingdom or his family, he lost himself. The very traits that made him a hero, his strength, his ambition, his bravery, had driven him to the brink of destruction. The gods, ever watchful and ever fickle, ensure that even in his final days, Theseus couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. Just when he thought he could find solace, just when he believed he could be at peace, they made sure to remind him that no one, not even the mightiest of heroes, is exempt from their will. But here's the thing, Theseus' story doesn't end with his death. Far from it. His legend lives on, not just in the form of heroic tales and grand feats, but in the lessons his life imparts. It's the timeless message that echoes through every corner of mythology. No matter how great we are, no matter how strong we may seem, we are still at the mercy of fate. The gods may test us. Our choices may come with unforeseen consequences. But in the end, it's how we deal with those consequences that defines us. Theseus' legacy isn't just in his victories, it's in his failures, his mistakes, and his eventual understanding that true heroism is found not in defeating monsters, but in accepting our own limitations. The story of Theseus, though tragic in many ways, is also a story of growth, a story about how the hero, once blind to the impact of his actions, comes to understand that even the greatest among us are not invincible. His flaws make him real, his mistakes make him relatable, and his eventual fall from grace makes him human. In the end, Theseus teaches us a powerful lesson, that no matter how high we rise, we must always be mindful of the consequences of our actions, because the gods, like fate itself, are never far behind, waiting to remind us that we can't always control the outcome. Let's pause and reflect on the legacy of Theseus, because while his story may be steeped in tragedy and loss, there's something deeply significant about how his tale fits into the larger tapestry of Greek mythology. Theseus, like many other legendary figures, wasn't just a hero in the traditional sense. He was flawed, made mistakes, and had to grapple with the consequences of his actions. Yet he remains a key figure whose life offers a rich canvas for exploring the themes of heroism, hubris, and fate. One of the reasons Theseus' story continues to resonate today is that, unlike some of the more flawless heroes in ancient myths, he represents the human side of heroism. He wasn't a god, nor was he some infallible figure who could do no wrong. Theseus was a man, and as such, his story is filled with moments of triumph and tragedy, success and failure. He wasn't just a warrior fighting monsters, he was a king, a son, and, ultimately, a man trying to find his place in a world governed by forces far greater than himself. Take the Minotaur, for example. Killing the beast was an incredible feat, but let's not forget the toll it took on Theseus. His victory in the Labyrinth was one of physical strength, but also of mental and emotional endurance. The Minotaur was a manifestation of both literal and figurative darkness, the darkness of human nature, the darkness of being trapped in a never-ending cycle of fate. Theseus faced not just the beast itself, but the maze that mirrored the complexities of his own existence. And while he emerged victorious, that victory came at a heavy price. The years of tribute, the loss of his father, and the eventual heartbreak of his own mistakes. What's more, Theseus' ultimate downfall, being cast aside by his own people and betrayed by those he trusted, speaks to a timeless lesson, that even the most beloved heroes can become victims of their own downfall. Theseus thought that by conquering the Labyrinth and the Minotaur, he would cement his place in history. But history, as it turns out, is more complex than that. It's not just about slaying monsters or winning wars, it's about how we live after the dust settles. This lesson is particularly relevant today, in a world where success is often defined by accomplishments and achievements. Theseus reminds us that it's just as important to consider the legacy we leave behind. It's not just the victories that define us, but how we handle the failures, the mistakes, and the moments of vulnerability that follow. Theseus' life serves as a stark reminder that no matter how grand our triumphs, we must be prepared for the price that comes with them. And then, of course, there's the matter of the gods. You can't tell the story of Theseus without acknowledging the central role the gods played in shaping his fate. The gods were ever present, pushing him forward, pulling him back, testing him with their whims. It's clear that no matter how heroic Theseus' deeds were, he was never truly free of their influence. The gods, in their unpredictable ways, kept him on a leash, reminding him that no mortal, no matter how mighty, can ever escape their grasp. What makes these stories so timeless, though, is the way they reflect the tension between human agency and divine will. Theseus made his own choices, but so did the gods, and the interplay between those choices created a story that is as much about fate as it is about free will. While Theseus did his best to outwit the gods and shape his own destiny, in the end it was the gods who determined his final fate. That's a constant theme in Greek mythology. Humans can strive, can fight, can win and lose. But at the end of the day, the gods have the final say-so. Theseus' story, like many others, teaches us something crucial, that we're all the mercy of forces beyond our control, no matter how much we think we can control our own destiny. The gods may laugh at our plans, and fate may throw us curveballs we never saw coming, but it's how we deal with those challenges, how we respond to the unexpected, that truly defines us. Now, I know you might be thinking, this is all kind of heavy, and you're right, it is. Theseus' life was marked by incredible highs and devastating lows, but that's what makes his story so powerful. It's a story of ambition, of overcoming odds, but also a story of learning humility, of understanding that no one, not even the greatest of heroes, is invincible. And so Theseus lives on not just in his victories, but in the lessons he teaches us. His life is a testament to the complexity of the human experience, a reminder that greatness doesn't come without its price, and that we are all, in some way, bound by forces greater than ourselves. Now, let's take a step back and consider why Theseus' story still resonates so strongly with us, thousands of years after it was first told. His tale isn't just about defeating monsters or navigating mazes, it's about the deeply human experience of grappling with our own limitations. Theseus may have been a hero in the eyes of many, but at his core, he was just a man, driven by the same desires and flaws that we all share. The gods, with their capriciousness and unpredictability, are a reminder of the forces beyond our control. But it's Theseus who teaches us how we must navigate the complexities of life. You see, Theseus' victories, while impressive, were often followed by costly mistakes. He couldn't escape the consequences of his actions, no matter how heroic his intentions had been. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that heroism is all about slaying the monster and walking away with glory. But Theseus' journey shows us that the real challenge lies in what comes after the victory. How do we face the repercussions of our choices? How do we reconcile our successes with the damage they might have caused? One of the most enduring aspects of Theseus' myth is the tension between his public persona as a great hero and the private turmoil he faced. On the surface, he was a conquering king, admired for his courage and strength. But underneath, he was burdened with regret, guilt, and the weight of his decisions. That's something we can all relate to. How often do we find ourselves celebrating an achievement, only to later realize the cost? Theseus' story reminds us that heroism is not about perfection. It's about how we navigate the messiness of our lives. And then there's the issue of legacy. We all want to be remembered, to leave a mark on the world. But what happens when that legacy is tarnished by our mistakes? Theseus may have been a hero, but he was also a man who made terrible errors and judgment errors that ultimately cost him his kingdom and his family. His legacy isn't just about his victories, it's about the lessons he learned too late. It's a reminder that the way we live our lives today will shape how we're remembered tomorrow. The gods' fate and the decisions we make will all play a part in the story that others tell about us. There's a deep irony in the way Theseus is remembered. On one hand, he's immortalized as one of Greece's greatest heroes. His battle with the Minotaur, his role in the unification of Athens, and his defiance of the gods all mark him as a man of great strength and determination. Yet, his flaws, his arrogance, his hubris, and his inability to escape fate are just as much a part of his story. The tragedy of Theseus is that he could never reconcile the heroic image he built for himself with the reality of his actions. In the end, he's remembered not only for what he achieved, but for the pain and loss that came with it. In a sense, Theseus represents all of us. We strive for greatness, we make mistakes, and we often find ourselves facing consequences that we can't undo. But what we do with those consequences, that's what defines us. Theseus' journey is a reflection of the human condition. It's about striving for something greater, but also coming to terms with the fact that nothing is ever truly within our control. The gods, fate, and our own choices all shape the path we walk. And the greatest heroes, like Theseus, aren't the ones who never fail, but the ones who learn to live with their failures and continue moving forward. So while Theseus may have been a tragic figure in the end, his story still offers something powerful to take away. It's not the glory of slaying monsters that matters, it's the way we handle the aftermath. It's the way we confront the mistakes we make, the people we hurt, and the choices we regret. Theseus didn't just conquer the Minotaur. He faced the greatest challenge of all, the challenge of living with the weight of his own humanity. In the end, we remember Theseus not just for his triumphs, but for the journey he took. He may have been defeated by fate, but he was never defeated by the complexities of his own heart. And in that, he is more than just a hero. He's a reminder that no one, not even the gods themselves, can escape the full arc of their own story. At this point in Theseus' story, we've seen his rise to greatness, his tragic fall, and the long road of reflection and regret that followed. But there's still something important. We need to address the legacy of the Minotaur. This mythical creature, born of divine anger and bound in the Labyrinth, is more than just a beast to be defeated. It's a symbol of the darker, hidden aspects of Theseus' journey, those parts of himself that he struggled with, the parts that would ultimately lead to his downfall. And while the Minotaur's death was meant to bring closure, its presence in Theseus' life left an indelible mark. What makes the Minotaur such a fascinating figure in mythology is that it embodies the duality within Theseus himself. The Minotaur, half man, half bull, represents the untamed, primal side of human nature, the part that's often hidden away, locked up in the dark corners of our minds. Theseus, as a hero, had to confront this side of himself. And while defeating the Minotaur might have seemed like an external victory, it was also an internal one. He overcame the darkness lurking in the labyrinth, but that darkness was never fully eradicated. It lived on in him, in the choices he made, and in the hubris that eventually led to his exile. The Minotaur was a product of divine retribution, a creature born of punishment and chaos, but it also served a deeper symbolic role. It was a reflection of the consequences of actions, of the twisted way that one sin can lead to another, and how even the smallest choice can ripple outward and create something monstrous. And as Theseus' story unfolded, he too became a symbol of this cycle. The choices he made early on, his pride, his desire to control his own fate, his willingness to challenge the gods, led him down a path that eventually trapped him in his own labyrinth of consequences. But let's think about the nature of these consequences for a moment. The Minotaur was kept alive by the sacrifices of the Athenians, their children set to feed the beast year after year. And in a way, Theseus' own journey mirrors this cycle of sacrifice. He did the right thing. He killed the Minotaur, ending the suffering of the innocent. But the price of that victory was steep. The tribute was paid in blood, both the Athenians and his own. As the gods exacted their revenge, the actions of Theseus, while noble, were never without consequence. He could never outrun the debts he owed, whether to the gods, to his family, or to the people of Athens. What's fascinating here is how the Minotaur serves as both the monster Theseus must defeat and the reflection of his own inner turmoil. It's the thing he must confront head-on, both in the labyrinth and in his own heart. The Minotaur isn't just a creature of flesh and bone, it's the embodiment of all that is messy, primal, and uncontrollable within Theseus. It's the part of him that refuses to be tamed, the part that leads him to make impulsive decisions and mistakes that ultimately cost him everything. In many ways, the Minotaur represents the deeper, darker aspects of heroism, the internal struggle that every hero must face. It's not enough to fight external monsters. You also have to confront the ones that live inside of you. Theseus thought he could control his destiny, that he could vanquish the monsters of the world and lead Athens to greatness. But the real monster was the one lurking within, the one that, no matter how hard he tried, would always remain a part of him. And this brings us to a key point in Theseus' story: redemption. As much as we love a good hero's journey with a neat and tidy ending, Greek mythology rarely gives us that kind of closure. Theseus' story is no different. He may have defeated the Minotaur, but he couldn't escape the consequences of his own choices. The gods were always watching, ready to remind him that fate was not something to be trifled with. His redemption, if it ever came, was not in defeating external monsters, but in facing the monsters within himself. Theseus may have failed in his personal life. His son was tragically killed, his kingdom lost, and he ended up exiled and betrayed. But in the end, he is remembered not just for his triumphs, but for the complex, multifaceted nature of his journey. His life serves as a cautionary tale of the cost of ambition, of the price of heroism, and of the inevitability of fate. It's a story that challenges us to look beyond the victories and to consider the consequences that shape our lives long after the dust has settled. Theseus, the hero who once slayed the Minotaur, reminds us that even the greatest among us must face the darkness inside. And in the end, it's that darkness, those mistakes, those regrets that often shape our true legacy. At this point in Theseus' story, we've explored the rise and fall of a hero who has faced some of the greatest challenges known to mythology. From the moment he defeated the Minotaur to the tragic end of his reign, Theseus' journey has been filled with contradictions. Greatness intertwined with failure, ambition matched by tragic consequences. But there's still one more piece of his legacy to consider: how his story has influenced the cultures that came after him. How does the tale of this flawed, tragic hero continue to echo through the ages? The influence of Theseus on later generations is hard to overstate. His myth, with all its complexities, has left an indelible mark on Western storytelling. The themes of the hero's journey, of overcoming trials and confronting personal demons, are not unique to Theseus. In fact, many heroes who followed him, whether in Greek myths or later in literature, can trace their origins back to the lessons Theseus' story imparts. Consider, for example, the archetype of the tragic hero. Theseus is often seen as one of the first figures in literature who embodies the complexities of a hero who is both great and deeply flawed. Heroes like Oedipus, Achilles, and even modern figures such as Hamlet all owe something to Theseus' story. He was one of the first to showcase the delicate balance between strength and weakness, triumph and failure. That makes the hero's journey so relatable. His tale shows us that being a hero doesn't mean being perfect. In fact, it often means grappling with imperfections, with inner demons, and with the fallout of our own decisions. But Theseus' impact isn't just confined to literature or storytelling. It also resonates in our understanding of leadership. In his rise to power, Theseus represented the potential of a leader to unite and guide his people. His role in bringing together the city-states of Athens is a powerful symbol of political unification, and it sets the stage for future leaders to follow. However, the tragic nature of his fall also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris, the fragility of power, and the responsibility that comes with leadership. His story shows us that even the most capable leaders are not immune to the consequences of their actions, and that a leader's strength lies not only in their victories, but in how they respond to their failures. The story of Theseus also provides a lens through which we can examine the role of fate in our lives. In ancient Greece, fate was often seen as an unstoppable force, something that even the gods could not alter. Theseus' story is a clear reflection of this belief. His victories were hard-won, but the consequences of his actions, the loss of his father, the betrayal of his own son, remind us that fate often has the final say, regardless of how hard we fight against it. Theseus tried to outsmart the gods, but in the end, it was the gods who held the power over him. His story teaches us that, no matter how much we strive for control, there are forces beyond our understanding or influence that shape our lives. But perhaps one of the most enduring aspects of Theseus' story is his relationship with the Labyrinth, both literal and metaphorical. The Labyrinth, as we know, was designed to trap the Minotaur, but it also served as a reflection of the internal struggles Theseus had to face. The maze was more than just a physical structure. It represented the challenges of navigating the complexities of life, of facing the darkness within oneself and of learning to live with the consequences of one's decisions. The thread that Ariadne gave Theseus was not just a physical guide out of the maze. It was a metaphor for the thread of wisdom that we all must follow when navigating our own personal labyrinths, and, like Theseus, we all must find our way out of the maze of life, even when the path is unclear. As we reflect on Theseus' impact, we realize that his story isn't just about him, it's about us, too. His triumphs and mistakes are not just relics of the past, they're lessons that continue to resonate in the present. Theseus' journey reminds us that no matter how great our achievements, we must also reckon with our flaws and the consequences of our actions. His story invites us to question what it means to be a hero, to be a leader, and to be human. Theseus' legacy, then, is not one of simple victory, it's a legacy of complexity and nuance. One that speaks to the challenges of living a meaningful life, of trying to do good while facing the unpredictable tides of fate. The gods may control much of the narrative, but it's how we respond to their whims, how we navigate the labyrinths they set before us that defines who we are in the end. The myth of Theseus continues to teach us that heroism is not just about slaying monsters. It's about learning to live with the consequences of our actions, finding a way through the labyrinth of life, and coming to terms with the forces that shape our destiny. And while the Minotaur may be long gone, the lessons Theseus learned in the labyrinth continue to guide us. As we approach the final stages of Theseus' story, it's time to zoom out a little and reflect on how his myth fits into the broader tapestry of Greek mythology. Theseus' journey, while deeply personal and filled with human struggles, is also a microcosm of the ancient Greek worldview. The Greeks, for all their emphasis on heroism, greatness, and the pursuit of glory, were equally concerned with the consequences of hubris, excessive pride, and the ways in which the gods and fate could thwart even the most powerful of mortals. Theseus embodies this tension, a figure who rises to incredible heights, but ultimately faces a fall that seems inevitable given the way the gods and fate operate in the myths. In many ways, Theseus' journey is a perfect example of the tragic hero archetype, one that would continue to dominate Western literature for centuries to come. His strength, intelligence, and courage make him an ideal hero, but they also blind him to his own limitations. Like so many other tragic figures in Greek mythology, think of Achilles, Oedipus, and even Heracles. Theseus' fatal flaw lies in his overconfidence. He believed he could control his destiny, that he could outwit the gods and circumvent fate. But in the end, it was his own flaws that led to his downfall. The gods, fickle and powerful, had the final word, and Theseus learned the hard way that no one can escape their judgment. But let's not forget Theseus' story also carries a message of redemption. While his life is marked by tragedy and failure, he is not defined solely by his mistakes. His story is one of growth, of coming to terms with his flaws, and, ultimately, of accepting the consequences of his actions. Theseus didn't start out as a perfect hero, and he certainly didn't end that way. But throughout his journey, he learned that true heroism lies not in avoiding mistakes, but in learning from them and continuing forward despite the odds. This theme of redemption is particularly powerful when we look at how Theseus' myth has evolved over time. Over the centuries, his story has been retold in various forms, each time offering new insights and lessons. In the Renaissance, for example, Theseus' struggle with the gods and his ultimate downfall were seen as a reflection of the human condition, a reminder that no matter how much we strive for greatness, we are always vulnerable to the whims of fate. In modern interpretations, Theseus' life serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the importance of humility. His story is timeless because it speaks to something deeply universal, the tension between human ambition and the uncontrollable forces of fate. But what about the impact of Theseus on modern culture? How does his myth continue to influence us today? The themes of bravery, leadership, and the hero's journey that we find in Theseus' tale are still very much alive in our storytelling. From movies to books to video games, the idea of a hero who faces tremendous odds and struggles with internal and external challenges remains a powerful narrative. Theseus, in this way, is a predecessor to many of the heroes we see today, from the likes of King Arthur and Beowulf to modern superheroes like Superman and Spider-Man. Perhaps one of the most enduring aspects of Theseus myth is how it highlights the complexity of human nature. The Greeks didn't create their heroes to be perfect. They made them relatable, filled with flaws and imperfections. Theseus isn't just a monster slayer, he's a man who makes mistakes, who suffers from pride and regret, and who learns that true strength comes not from defeating external foes, but from confronting the inner battles that define who we are. In a world where perfection is often glorified, Theseus reminds us that greatness is not measured by our ability to avoid failure, but by how we handle it when it inevitably comes our way. In a sense, Theseus myth also asks us to consider our own relationship with fate and the gods. In modern terms, we might not believe in the Greek gods, but the idea that our lives are shaped by forces beyond our control is still relevant. Whether it's the influence of family, society, or even our own subconscious desires, there are forces that shape our lives that we cannot fully control. And, just like Theseus, we often find ourselves trying to navigate a labyrinth of choices, each one leading us closer to our own truth, whether we like it or not. In the end, Theseus' story is a reminder that no one is immune from the complexities of life. We all have our battles to fight, our monsters to slay, and our mistakes to atone for. But through it all, the most important lesson we can learn from Theseus is that heroism isn't about being perfect. It's about striving to be better, learning from our failures, and finding the strength to keep going even when the labyrinth seems to twist it to escape. As we reach the final chapter of Theseus' journey, let's reflect on the full arc of his myth, the lessons it teaches, and how it has stood the test of time. Theseus, with his victories, his flaws, and his eventual fall, represents the complexities of heroism and humanity itself. His story isn't a simple narrative of triumph, it's a rich tapestry of ambition, failure, redemption, and the pursuit of understanding. Theseus' life shows us that heroism is not defined by one act of greatness, but by the ongoing struggle to balance the weight of our actions with the consequences they bring. For all his greatness, defeating the Minotaur, uniting Athens, and overcoming impossible odds, Theseus was still a mortal man. And that is perhaps the most profound lesson of all. Even the greatest heroes are human. They are subject to the whims of fate, to the actions of others, and to the consequences of their own choices. Theseus thought he could control his destiny, but as his story unfolded, he realized that no one can escape the forces that shape their lives. Whether it's the gods, the labyrinth of his own making, or the people around him, Theseus' life is a testament to the fact that heroism is never a straightforward path. His story is also one of transformation, from the young, ambitious prince who believed in his ability to defeat any challenge. Theseus evolves into a tragic figure who learns the true cost of his actions. This transformation is not just physical, but emotional and spiritual. He goes from hero to king, from conqueror to exile, and in doing so, he experiences the full spectrum of what it means to be human. The Minotaur, which he initially fought as a symbol of external evil, becomes a metaphor for the inner struggles he faces, a reflection of his own pride, ambition, and ultimately his flaws. In many ways, the labyrinth of Theseus' story mirrors the labyrinth of life itself. We all find ourselves navigating complicated paths, facing choices that lead us in different directions, some of which are inevitable, others shaped by our decisions. The thread that Ariadne gave Theseus is a symbol of guidance, of the wisdom we seek to help us find our way out of the maze. And while the thread helped Theseus escape the labyrinth physically, the real challenge for him was escaping the mental and emotional labyrinth he created for himself. But here's where Theseus' story transcends its mythological roots. The labyrinth is not just a place of physical entrapment, it is a universal symbol of the struggles we all face in our lives. We all experience moments of confusion, moments where we feel lost or trapped by the decisions we've made. And just like Theseus, we have to find our own way out, guided by the wisdom we gather along the journey. Sometimes that guidance comes from others, sometimes from within, and sometimes it's just about following the thread, taking the next step, even when the way forward isn't clear. Despite his tragic end, Theseus' legacy remains one of enduring influence. His life and his story have inspired countless generations to come, shaping the myths and heroes that followed. But perhaps the greatest impact Theseus had was in his willingness to confront his own mortality. Unlike many heroes whose tales are marked by invulnerability, Theseus is a hero who stumbles, falls, and eventually learns that his humanity, his flaws, are just as important as his victories. In a world where perfection is often celebrated, Theseus reminds us that it's okay to fail. What matters is how we rise after the fall, how we learn from our mistakes, and how we continue to navigate the labyrinth of life. So, as we close the book on Theseus' life, remember that his story is not just a myth to be told, it's a mirror reflecting the journey we all take. His struggles, his victories, and his defeats are our own, written across the ages in the timeless language of human experience. Theseus' myth, at its heart, is a reminder that heroism isn't about perfection. It's about facing the challenges of life, learning from the journey, and emerging stronger on the other side. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest lesson of all. Heroism isn't about slaying monsters or conquering labyrinths. It's about navigating the maze of life with all the wisdom, humility, and resilience we can muster.